Got a sponsor for y'all this week, and like we said last week, we always try to find partners that fit with our audience, and based on y'all's comments about our computer model throughout the year last year, we think MyBookie fits with you. MyBookie.com, you're already placing bets with your buddy on the side. Go with somebody that's a little more reliable, that has a slogan that really summarizes who they are. You bet, you win, they pay. That's it. Don't worry, no headaches. If you win, you're going to get a payout. And they're great because they have other stuff besides just straight up lines. They've got a lot of prop bets. Who's going to win the national championship? Who's going to win the Heisman Trophy? Who's going to get fired? And right now, if you sign up with a promo code CFBNerds on MyBookie.com, they're going to do a first deposit match up to $1,000. Really doesn't get better than that. Check them out. MyBookie.com, links in the description. College football nerds, going to talk Florida and LSU. LSU fans know that we can't pick your team right, and Florida fans know that we sometimes can't pick your team right either. And this is the video where Florida fans come over from the Auburn video and tell us to eat crow. I don't know that we're going to do that. We're going to get into that here in a minute. But I want to remind y'all, if you do like what we're doing, please give us a like and subscribe. It's the number one thing that helps out the channel. I got a comment homework for y'all this week. I want you to comment in the comments, what do you think about Florida's win over Auburn? Did it say more good about Florida or bad about Auburn? And maybe that's where we lose half of our Florida viewers to kick off this video. Want both y'all to know we're not LSU or Florida haters. So maybe that will give us a little bit of direction on where we're going with this. But Josh, big win for Florida, no doubt about it. Number 7 Auburn had them in their house and beat them this weekend. And we said all season, we caught absolute hell all season. You can look at every one of our videos, look all over Twitter. We've been getting killed by Auburn fans because we said this offense, these numbers, it's a canary in the coal mine. It's going to show up at some point. What happens when the game offensively you played against Tulane happens against a good team? I think we saw it. We saw it this weekend against Florida. Before we get into too much of the details of that, just high level, just like I said for the commenters to say, I'm going to put the question to you. Josh, did this game give you a whole lot of confidence of Florida going into LSU? Or did it prove out what we've been saying kind of negative about Auburn this year? Or do you want to take the easy way out and say a little bit of both?
It's always a little bit of both, but sometimes it's more one than the other. This didn't really change my viewpoint on Florida, which, if you haven't seen the other video, I have Florida in my top 10. I don't think they're a bad team. I think they're quite a good team. But I don't have them in that group of 5 or 6 that I have contending for the playoffs right now. I thought Auburn was a pretender as a top 10 team. And again, I think Auburn's a top 20 team. I think they're pretty good. They've got a really good defense. That offense has a million things that look like it's wrong with it. And, you know, being a top 20 team doesn't necessarily mean you consistently beat a top 10 team. And what we saw was when push comes to shove, you know, a quarterback that is regularly completing 45 to 50% of his passes, that is regularly throwing for 5.5 or 6 yards per attempt, can't beat a top tier team, without a high level running game and defensive scores. And even when you get 4 turnovers in a game with that level of offensive production, you can't beat a high level team. So to me, what it showed was that Auburn has the offensive issues we thought they had. And I made a point in one of our videos, I think it was the top 10 one, kind of this little mini ramp, right? That I did not know if Auburn was an 11-1 team or an 8-4 team. And we tweeted about it that there's the Fremo efficiency statistics said Auburn was equally likely to go 11-1 or 8-4 based on the data. And I did not know whether to call a Mississippi State Auburn or Tulane Auburn. And like you said, we got Tulane Auburn. And I don't know if we'll get Tulane Auburn the rest of the year or if the Mississippi State team will show up, because they were a lot sharper in that game. They were genuinely a better team in that game than they've been in some others. And maybe it's on the road, maybe they play better at home, but that told me that Auburn, yes, they do have the offensive issues, I thought. And Florida, it's not a knock on them because their defense is elite and that elite defense exposed the issues that Auburn had. That's how you win a football game. And they did end up winning it by double digits, despite a terrible turnover margin.
Yeah, and before, and this is probably the last I'm going to say this because I want to talk about LSU Florida matchups. But before y'all get at us in the comments saying, oh, y'all are dumb, I can't believe you picked Auburn to beat Florida, blah, 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 burn your model, whatever. I want every Florida fan to think back to Saturday in the fourth quarter before P. Ryan broke off that 88-yard run. Because what I said was Florida is going to have this game that they should have won by 3 or 4 touchdowns, and Auburn's going to do nothing the whole game, going to have 13 points the whole game. It's 13-17 in the fourth quarter, and going to find some way to stick a touchdown in on the end of the game and win 20-17. And I guarantee you that was running through Florida fans' minds before that run happened. And that's the other thing that I want to talk about, and it has bearing on this game too. When you look at Florida, there's so many similarities to Auburn in that they've got a great defense, but that offense scares me a lot. They put up 24 points in a game where they had an 18-yard drive off of an interception, and I get it. Interceptions are part of who you are. That's that led to that. But you had an 18-yard drive, a 64-yard pass. It was a slant that ended up going 64 yards, about a 10-yard pass, and then an 88-yard run where Auburn missed 2 tackles, had him dead to rights in the hole, missed him, and then didn't push him out of bounds. So you had all of your offense, except for a field goal that was on a 51-yard drive, all of your offense were on 3 plays, essentially, the whole game. Usually when you have 3 plays that lead to touchdowns, it's part of a score that looks like 42 points, not 24 points. So if you're a Florida fan calling us idiots, then that means you're super confident that offense is the kind of offense that can consistently drive the field against a good team. And that's where we get into our discussion about LSU, because, Josh, if I'm looking at the matchups, we know LSU has a good offense. We know Florida has a good defense. My concern, really, this is what it boils down to for me. I think that LSU can consistently get first downs and doesn't have to rely on a slant that goes for 64 yards or a run that goes 88 yards, and can get enough offense even against a good defense, whereas I'm not confident that Florida can do that. Tell me what you think.
To elaborate on the point you made, this was an interesting statistic to me. Florida had 17 possessions in the game against Auburn. 17. Typical.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Typical is more like 12. As of the 88-yard touchdown run, so that was 9 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. It was Auburn 13, Florida 17. Auburn goes 5 plays and punt, in large part due to that 22-yard sack that Bo Nix, having a freshman moment, took. That was the whole turning point to the game. But that was that one-play drive with the 88-yard touchdown run by P. Ryan, 17-13, and it's the 15th possession of the game. Most games, you're not always going to get 15 possessions in a football game. And to your point about how we thought this game would go, our assumption, or I say assumption, I mean, the best guess we had was that when it got to that situation, because of the way Malzahn's offense works, it's almost designed to create those random touchdown plays. And we felt like the game would swing. And if it swings right there, then it's 2017 Auburn over Florida, and maybe Auburn wins the game. That's how close it was. I mean, and our model had it 31-26, a 5-point game.
Right.
So we were all saying this is like a 1-touchdown thing. Florida's the one that got the break. But to your point, I want to, people I think probably don't understand how many times Florida had the ball without scoring. And when you're playing an LSU who's going to drive the field, and let's say you do much better against LSU than LSU's done in other games offensively, do you really think you're going to hold LSU to 13 points in 15 drives? I mean, if they get a field goal every third drive, they're going to get more points than that. And if they get a touchdown every fourth drive, they're going to get more points than that. So that's kind of where you're at from Florida. And it speaks a lot to the defense in the Auburn game. But in the game of college football, if you've got a high-level offense, you can't keep that high-level offense from ever scoring. They're going to score some. And you can hold Auburn to 13 because their offense has major issues. I don't think LSU's offense has major issues. So I think LSU, they're going to put up more than 13 points. And if you get the same game that you had against Auburn and they were at like 21, 24 at that point in the game, you may not have even won that one. So when you consider just how much better LSU is offensively, it's scary. It's just scary for me that everything else that Florida can't keep pace.
One of the things I would say in Florida's favor potentially is we've seen LSU's defense give up points to, even if we're not super high on Florida's offense, give up points to offenses that aren't as good as Florida's offense. So I don't know, because LSU was really banged up. They're not as banged up. That might be part of it. It also might be part of it that it's hard to turn it on until you need to sometimes for some teams. But if we're putting a positive in Florida's potential, bucket, is it the fact that maybe LSU's defense isn't the LSU defense, a vintage one, and that Florida doesn't need to win a game 17-13, 24-13?
I think that's the statistic that's, maybe the most encouraging if you're a Florida fan. So LSU, a lot of it's garbage time in some of these games, but over 6 yards per play to Texas, over 5 yards per play to Vanderbilt. They held Utah State to 159 total yards, which was in many ways maybe their best game of the season. Utah State was a solid team. A lot of people had LSU on at least a close game alert, if not an upset alert. Now there's signs with glitches before. Utah State hadn't always necessarily been totally dominant, more like a 5 yard per play team. At San Diego State and Colorado State. They blew up Wake Forest, and that might have been a weird event. They've played poor competition since then. But it was encouraging. Both of us are a little worried with the Vanderbilt game, but again, a lot of that was garbage time. Texas, I think for all their faults, does have a very, very good offense, and Georgia Southern they shut down completely. So it's hard to gauge LSU's defense. I think it's easy to say they've really slipped because they're giving up a ton of points. They give up 38 points to Texas. That might have just been Texas being good. It might have been the fact that Texas was amped up to all hell. And, they're playing in a home stadium, and they hit passes that were, big-time throws against big-time receivers. But I think the LSU has enough faults defensively that Dan Mullen, who, bear in mind, has a lot of experience playing against LSU. He has a lot of experience playing against Dave Aranda. He may be able to generate some stuff offensively. And there was no doubt in my mind that Florida showed some things that were positive in the Auburn game. Now, they screwed up a lot. All the turnovers, there's an argument that turnovers kept Florida from blowing out Auburn. Maybe we view this game differently if it's 38-13, and we feel like it's a lot closer in a lot of people's minds, even though that didn't happen, and even though Florida's had those issues consistently. But there's plenty of signs that they can move the ball.
It's interesting that you mention that, because the other thing that kept Auburn from running away with it was their turnovers, and a lot of that might have had to do with that hostile crowd, rookie quarterback playing in that environment. But now you've got Florida, who made all these mistakes at home, maybe not benefiting from those on the road. Oh, and by the way, you've got a inexperienced quarterback having to play at LSU. So does that really tip the scales for you as well?
Quite possibly. And I know there's going to be at least one of these videos we're going to get a comment, because I'm using, by the way, we do these live and I don't have time to do 100 takes. So sometimes I say something wrong. I've been saying Florida lost, talking about the turnover margin. What I really mean is that Florida turned the ball over a lot. It was a 0 turnover margin in this game because Auburn turned it over 4 times, 3 interceptions, 1 fumble. Florida fumbled the ball 4 times. That game was balanced only because Auburn's ineptitude was enough to counteract whatever Florida did wrong. I mean, if you're in Death Valley and you fumble the ball 4 times, the chances of Joe Burrow throwing 3 interceptions are pretty darn slim. And you may give the game away in that aspect. And I feel like we're hammering Florida right now, which isn't really the intention. But as we say a lot, we evaluate you as a show based off your opponent and based on the level of play you want to hold yourselves to. Florida fans are, and it's like 10 people. So I don't know. By the way, if you're a Florida fan and you think we're being reasonable, give us a comment and tell us that, because we always hear the crazy voices.
Because nobody is.
We always hear the crazy voices, not the sane ones. And I like to always bear in mind, there's however many, 25,000 people watching. I heard from 6, so maybe they're not necessarily the most representative group. Florida wants to hold themselves to a top 10 standard. And they want to hold themselves, I think, starting to think in their mind to a playoff standard. That's a higher standard. You can't fumble the ball 4 times and win against a playoff caliber team. You're not going to beat an Alabama doing that. And what we've said in our top 10 and what you have in your ranking is that LSU, in your mind, is better than Alabama right now. So you can't fumble the ball 4 times. If you're a Florida fan and you accept I couldn't do that against Alabama, you need to accept you can't do it against LSU either. And that's the challenge that I think is in front of them. Again, I mean, box score, and we'll move on to the straight matchup now, but 6.8 yards per pass, 4 yards per carry versus 5.4 per pass, 3.6 per carry. I mean, that was the game you had with 4 turnovers in each side that just drug out to 17 each possessions, let you find points. Man, you let a team like LSU or Alabama hang around for 17 possessions, and you're going to give up 40 even on a good defensive day with that many opportunities for a good offense.
So let's assume that the LSU team we've seen this year is who they are, which is a shaky defensive team. LSU fans, don't get mad. You're killing Alabama for their backups giving up 31, 2 touchdowns on the last 2 drives to Ole Miss. Then it's reasonable to kill you for 38 to Vanderbilt or whatever it was. Let's say LSU is who we think they are or who they've shown themselves to be so far this year. Shaky defense and just balls to the wall, top-notch offense. Where would you put them in terms of this matchup? Do they have an advantage? Does the fact their offense is that good outweigh what we're concerned with on the defense, specifically as it relates to Florida? Or if LSU is who we think they are or who they've shown themselves to be so far, does that mean Florida has the advantage?
There's 2 things in football that are sort of axioms. 1, defense wins championships. And then 2, offensive powers tend to win big games. And those things seem kind of contrary to each other. The reason defense wins championships is that defense, as you said in a video recently, travels. Defense tends to be pretty consistent, and you might have something of an off day, usually against a team you're not motivated against. But defense plays pretty consistently to be able to keep you in games. But there's nothing as strong as the ability for a big offense to score points against a good opponent and put pressure on them. You see it constantly in the NFL. Teams that have poor defenses but really good offenses, they will drop random games to bad teams, but they're always the teams you see in the playoff at the end of the year, and they're the teams winning those games in the playoff at the end of the year. I think if you're Florida, it's not a good sign that you have some issues defensively, offensively, and it's more so than I think that LSU has issues defensively. Because right now with Florida, like with a 4 turnover thing, I hesitate to think that Florida is going to score a ton of points, even against a good but not necessarily great defense. I think anybody that puts up significant resistance is going to keep Florida from scoring a lot. LSU has the ability to put up a lot of points even against a pretty darn good defense. And that's the pacing issue. Now, LSU may not show up. There may be wrinkles. And for the whole discussion we're having today and even our score predictions, I can't say for certain that when they play a top 10 or top 5 unit, if the offense that LSU is currently showing is going to translate. Maybe Florida's pass rush with Zuniga and company, they create fits for LSU, and it throws up the timing of all the plays, and it all shuts down. We see that all the time in college football. There's so many things where if you have 1 second less to do what you want to do, that suddenly your offense doesn't work. That was the whole Ole Miss. Ole Miss's offense was a train wreck with their offensive coordinator. And now Phil Longo's at North Carolina, and they're suddenly this really competitive team because they're in the ACC, and they've got time to throw the ball. So I do skew a little bit more towards LSU's offense than I do the defense. But, I mean, SP Plus just came out today. LSU's 3rd overall offense between Alabama and Oklahoma. 28th ranked defense, which is, back there, but it's not awful. Florida's 32 on offense, 5 on defense. I'd rather take the top 5 offense than the top 5 defense in that matchup, especially with Florida flirting, in the 30s and 40s offensively, and LSU's defense still being higher ranked than Florida's offense.
All right, since you're talking nerdy stuff like S&P Plus, why don't you go ahead and quickly get us through the model and go ahead and give me your score prediction.
So, I think we've done videos for about everybody at this point, but long story short, because like LSU, Texas, we didn't have the model. We'd use per play data, so yard per carry, yard per attempt, not total yardage. We do that because, for example, some games you have 17 possessions, some games you play hurry up, some games you don't. Teams don't get the same number of plays in college, so total yardage is not a very good statistic to cite to. And we use that to look at how you did against your opponents. We build a matrix on how your opponents did against everybody else. We generate some comparative statistics for you. Then we do a predictions on how you're going to do in this game, what your performance is going to look like. And then we look at your performance against teams that you've had this season. And then we build a scoring model that's unique to your team and how you've responded to given situations. So the simplest example from that is, some teams can score from similar yardage, very different outcomes. 6.2 yards per play is what Florida had against Tennessee, and they scored 34 points. In their opener against Georgia Southern, LSU was about 6.56 yards per play, only 0.3 of a yard more per play, and they scored 55. LSU has been a lot more productive from a scoring sense than Florida has with similar yardage. And there's certain points where you tend to have fall off or pick up, right? You'll have teams. Auburn's like this all the time. We talk about it constantly. If they have 4.5 yards per play, they can't score at all. And if they have 6 to 7, they'll score 40. It's not a flat like points per yard kind of situation, and it's important because it's relevant here pretty significantly. The intermediary statistics, LSU in terms of percentages allowed. So this is a flat neutral statistic. If your opponent's average 6 yards per carry, you've allowed 4, you allowed 66% of their averages. LSU's allowing 68% of rush averages and 98% of passing averages. We can't do a ton for control for garbage time. That's partly due to data sets, partly due to, me not wanting to stick my finger in the pie and say, this is where I draw the line. I try to leave it to be as neutral as possible. But that 98% pass defense number, I think, would surprise some people, that they're giving up right at season averages for their opponents. And the run defense, which has not actually been their strength the past couple of years, has been very, very good at the 68% mark. Florida is a lot more balanced, 77% rush defense, 89% pass defense. That pass defense, again, 89% is good. It's not really great. And you can say, well, we're really good and we're good in practice, but I'm just telling you as a neutral point, neither one of these teams is holding teams to very far off their average passing, but they've both done a very good job in run defense. The result of that from our model's position, unsurprisingly, doesn't think either team's going to be able to run the ball. 3.4 yards per carry for LSU, which is maybe just enough to keep the other team honest. Florida, 2.4 yards per carry, which is not enough to be functional. But it does have LSU at 9.2 yards per attempt. Florida at a still pretty good 8.5 yards per attempt. That's not a terrible 6.5 to 5.6 yard per play prediction. Again, that actually balances for tendencies, and that's not like a straight average. Those are decent numbers to where both teams are going to move the ball. The difference in the model's eyes is the way that these teams can score. And that takes into account things like Florida's propensity to turn the ball over and the fact that LSU can have more of a quick hit offense. That comes down to a 49-26 score in favor of LSU over Florida. 23-point margin of victory. I don't know that that's out of whack. I mean, my view, I think LSU's the better team, and I think they're the better team justifiably. Are they 23 points better? Personally, maybe not, but I'm still going to think they're about 20. I mean, the line of 13 is probably higher than a lot of people think it should be. I don't think that's wrong. Now, I don't think LSU scores 49 in this game, but I still think I'm going to say 41, and I'm going to give spot Florida 21. And, if you assume that LSU doesn't turn the ball over as much as Auburn did, 21 points is really a better offensive performance than Florida had against Auburn. 41 points is the indicator of an elite offense in that game. I think 41-21, in my view, with what's in front of me, which could be completely proven wrong, given especially that LSU hasn't faced an elite defense and we don't know how they'll react to it. 41-21 is my score, which is, at the end of the day, I'm not all that far off from the models, 49-26.
Yeah, I mean, I think the model's high. It seems like it's been giving offenses a little more credit this year than in years past. It's also still early. I know people laugh about that because it's week 7, but it is still early, and we don't have a lot of external data. Even Bill Connolly today said S&P Plus is 40% influenced by preseason or last year or whatever. So I don't think this gets into the 40s, but I don't think that's crazy. And just for perspective, I mean, LSU fans can appreciate this. LSU had an awesome defense last year, especially a pass defense. Alabama scored 29 at LSU and shut it down after the third quarter. So 41 that you're saying is not ridiculous. And that goes back to if we think that if LSU is who we think they are. So Florida fans are probably going to be offended right now, but Florida fans need to realize, like, if LSU is truly a top 3 type team, truly an elite team, then you either think you are an elite team or you're going to give up 30 to 40 points. There's no other way to go with this, really. I mean, a good example of this, tell me if this is accurate, a fair analogy. I think this game is very analogous to what we saw with Michigan State and Ohio State.
I think that's probably a really good analogy. And, it's funny, right? We get killed when we're wrong and nobody notices when we're right, partly because fans watch their own videos. I had Ohio State, Michigan State 34-13. That game was 34-10. And I said in the video, I didn't think Michigan State was a bad team, but I thought Ohio State was that good. And Michigan State, I think, does have a very good defense this year. In SP+, they're 6th in the country, and they still gave up 34 points. When you're playing top 5 offenses, they tend to score 30 to 40. Same deal as the pros. It's just hard to stop a high-end passing attack. Joe Burrow, who I was not super high on by any means last year, is so much more comfortable in this offense. There is zero doubt. And that the reason that I got so high so fast on LSU was in that Texas game. I don't care what the score was. There were a couple plays where he's throwing to receivers and he's dropping the ball on the correct shoulder of the receiver in a quick read on a seam, on an RPO. He is comfortable and accurate in that offense in a way that he just was not last year. I'm still a little skeptical, or a little concerned, I should say, really, because he wasn't this way last year. And there's a piece of me that's very stubborn. And I'm kicking myself, by the way, with Auburn, Florida, because I was so critical of Auburn offensively. And I said, well, maybe I should give him more credit for the Mississippi State game. This is maybe another kind of example of it. Burrow has looked a different player than he did last year. I mean, his accuracy and ball placement's at a different level. His decision making's at a different level. I'm basically assuming that's comfort level with the offense. And if I'm right with that, then they're in the 30 to 35, 45 point range, even against a 6th overall in the country defense.
And I think so. What we saw in that game with Ohio State, Michigan State it was tight early, but because Michigan State couldn't take advantage when they had the ball, they had drops, they had quarterback misfires, they couldn't sustain drives, which we saw. Look, I think Auburn's defense is probably better than LSU's, even though LSU might have a lot more first-rounders on it. Because they couldn't sustain drives, over time, that second quarter in particular, the offense of Ohio State just leaned on them. And it was a boiling frog situation, and you look up and it's 23-7 or whatever. So I do think Florida's a good football team. But I do think they're in that second grouping where we have a huge gap. It's right around 5th or 6th. That is just big. And you talked about good teams score a lot of points. It doesn't matter who they're playing. Alabama Clemson has been, besides that one game a couple years ago where Kelly Bryant was playing for Clemson, it's been a 37-41, 44-40 type game. So, and those were good defenses. Those were top defenses. So I don't think you're crazy. I don't think it gets into the 40s, though, because of sort of like the Ohio State game where it's played real tight early, and then LSU finds a stretch, second or third quarter, where they go bam, bam, score enough to where they can put it on cruise control a little bit. So give me 34-17 LSU, with the understanding that I don't hate Florida. Florida fans think we hate them. We hate their team. We don't. Like last year, we had Georgia winning that game. We just thought Georgia was a better team. We misfired on LSU, but that was really Joe Burrow's second taste of a really good defense. So I don't hate Florida, but I truly think this year this LSU team is one of those top tranche kind of teams. So that's where I've got them. Any more thoughts on this game?
The last thing I'll say, there are a million things we didn't talk about. There's a million things with players. The LSU defensively with Rashard Lawrence and Glenn Logan, and when those guys have all been healthy, they were a lot better than when they haven't been. The same thing happened with Florida, with Zuniga and then Henderson. Don't think we're ignoring all these aspects of the game. We just, it's 30 minutes. We're on a clock. There's certain rabbit holes we traced and certain rabbits that we didn't want to chase down a hole. But yeah, I agree with you. I think Florida is probably, I would say it's probably a top 15 team in my mind. The gap between, number 4 and number 15 is just that large. And it's often been that large, but I think it's especially true this year. And that's why I have this game a blowout. And it's not intended as an insult to a Florida game. That I think Florida's going to finish like 10-2 or something like that.
Yeah, and Florida fans, keep in mind, if you put Joe Burrow in place of Bo Nix this Saturday, you don't win that game. I mean, you don't get the ridiculous interceptions, and then you don't have a quarterback missing wide open throws. So again, we're looking at data. We're not killing your team because we hate your team. And I'm glad you brought up the Florida getting players back. We were getting killed in the comments for that. But we spent the entire Auburn, Florida video talking about how great Florida's defense was, irrespective of who was in or out. The talking points in that game weren't about Florida's defense because it was a known quantity. So the fact that they were getting guys back really wasn't where we were going. So anyway, like you said, we don't always have time to talk about everything we want, including this one. We are running out of time, so we want to remind y'all, let us know in the comments. Remember, score prediction. Do you think that Florida's win over Auburn said more good about Florida, more bad about Auburn? Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.